Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes poorly timing video releases since day one. This is our talk series. Today I'm going to rant about the audio issues on Android. Talk about Darth Maul since a number of us are going to be unlocking him after the completion of this conquest. Some thoughts on Fleet, and then what I want to start doing is every quarter I want to speculate on what's to come in that quarter. So in this case, from October through December, speculating on what we'll see, and we'll do this on a quarterly basis moving forward. And we're going to wrap up this video with fantasy basketball because I know what my community wants. It is sleepers and breakouts. But first, Galaxy of Heroes. Since May or June, I have not been able to play this game on my phone without outside audio, and it is driving me crazy. It limits where, when, and how I can play the game. I can no longer casually just go for a walk or do something else and play. It makes Conquest miserable because Conquest is a game mode where you just kind of want to zone out, listen to something else, and just grind through it. I can't do that now unless I go through the process of setting something else up to listen or play. Or if I'm in another location, I just have to deal with the fact that I have to go in silent because I'm not playing with the game's sound effects or music. On my phone, it's silent. I believe this issue happened with iPhones before, and CG took care of it relatively expeditiously, but it's going on 5 months. It's May or June since this has been going on. I thought it would be handled by now, so I never really thought about it. I've been ranting about it on Grand Arena, but I haven't done it on these talk videos, and I wanted to get to it. I find it very perplexing because in like a retail circumstance, like in malls, if a mall store doesn't have their music going, that's a crisis because your customers leave the store because the lack of music makes people uncomfortable. And stores are very quick to resolve those kinds of issues if you've ever encountered that. So CG, fix your game. We did this last time with Fennec, and it's something I think I'm going to do from now on, which is look at the gearing from 0 to 11. Because 11 is that point where you can gear someone up fairly cheaply and start playing around with them and using them and see how useful they are. At least with the marquee characters too, then you can look at using a 3-star version, but with Maul is a 7-star unlockable. Now with Maul, he's fairly easy to gear. 2 Carbantes, 1 stun gun, 3 cuffs. 4 hollow projectors is a lot, but those are a cheap piece. 2 fusion furnaces, and then there's 2 Kairos. And for a newer character, that is not that bad. That is someone that I'll be able to gear up immediately upon unlocking. And you can see here down below, I've got Imperial Super Commando. Imperial Super Commando is a harder gear outside of the Kairos, but 2 Kairos on a new character, that's not bad at all. And again, that's 0 to 11. This will tie into the quarterly speculation. I want to give some thoughts on the Executor, especially after wrapping up this last Grand Arena. I didn't really like using it on defense. Because when my opponents got to my fleet defense, they were usually able to take out the Executor in 2 attacks. It would hold that first attack, almost always, but it usually would go down if they took out the Razor Crest. And I felt like the Malevolence and the Negotiator were better at standing up to 2 to 3 or more defense. So I may be using the Executor on offense moving forward. It is absolutely meta in Fleet Arena though. Now on top of that, I don't really trust CG right now in terms of how long the Executor is going to be meta, which is why when the event returned last week, I didn't do a bunch of refreshes. I did a couple, but I'm not trying to rush it to 6 and 7 stars, especially as a free-to-play player. I am accelerating it, but I'm happy to take a little bit of time. My Fleet Arena, though, I do benefit from it not being overly strong. But I feel there's a lot of incentive now, I think, for CG to be a little bit more aggressive in changing metas. And I think how CG is handling the Galactic Legends right now, where they're doing one at a time instead of just dumping two, makes it a little bit easier for them to shift that. And I wonder if they would take that same model and do it in fleet. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And there's not a lot of ways they can do it quickly, but there's a couple ways that they can make a few fleets much stronger, and that will lead us into the quarterly speculation. Moving forward, we're going to do this at around the beginning of each quarter. This would have been better to do a couple weeks ago before Fennec was put into the game, but she was a predictable one. The biggest thing on the horizon is Book of Boba Fett. So what we can be anticipating is either they are going to look back at Mandalorian Season 2 for some content, or they could be looking forward to Book of Boba Fett, or some mixture of the two. Not all of the time CG works with Lucasfilm for content like they did with the Bad Batch. Sometimes, like with the Mandalorian characters, those came out after Season 1. There isn't a consistent pattern here. So we don't know which way Book of Boba Fett is going to work. But Mandalorian Season 2, when we take a look back at that, Scout Troopers are the biggest obvious one. They are one of the biggest missing characters and most desired characters in the game. They're an obvious support character that would work as an Imperial Remnant, although with an Imperial Remnant squad, that would mean the Scout Troopers would have to be good enough where you would want to use that Moff Gideon squad. I know a lot of people use the Veers lead, but it would allow for a nice two separate squads. The other way they could go is Dr. Pershing, a recurring character, Empire, Imperial Remnant support. They could mess with things a little and not even give him Imperial Troopers tag, which would limit his use with Moff Gideon, but it would be interesting to see how else they could utilize a character like him. We're going to run through some of these quickly. Cobb Vanth was very memorable from the Season 2 pilot. Mayfeld, although I doubt we see him. Someone who I think is more interesting that I do think we have a higher chance of seeing is Paz Vizsla here. Paz Vizsla would address one of the things that the Mandalorian faction is missing, which is like a good, true tank. Even in this image here, you can see some like Chirrut elements. Paz Vizsla, though, he was in Mandalorian Season 1, makes sense. He is the son of Pre Vizsla, who, for those who have watched Clone Wars, knows is a major character in Clone Wars, who had the Darksaber at a moment. He's a character I've wanted in the game for a very long time, and I believe Jon Favreau voiced Pre Vizsla. Now, it doesn't tie directly into Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett, but Pre Vizsla would be Mandalorian tagged, did have the Darksaber, does match up with the Maul lore, and would make sense as a character to add to the game, even though it doesn't fit directly into one of those shows. And just like with Paz Vizsla, with Maul coming into the game, having the possibility of making the Mandalorian faction more viable, seeing more Mandalorians is a possibility, and Casca Reeves, Sasha Banks' character, is a possibility for someone we could pair with Bo-Katan and other Mandalorians to make a stronger faction, especially if we're in a situation where Maul is going to Lord Vader and additional Mandalorians are going to be needed to actually make that faction viable. Any marquee characters we need to be thinking about moving towards either Epic Confrontation, Galactic Legend, Journey characters. Those would be an Old Man Boba Fett and possibly a Beskar staff Mando. That is what has been speculated for a while. But I would like to see Old Man Boba as a potential marquee character. I like this Tusken version that we saw very briefly in Season 2 of Mandalorian. The Beskar staff Mando, I still think we're going to see. A lot of people have speculated on this. It was weird when we got Beskar Mando that he didn't have the staff and he just had that vibro blade, which was just kind of like, for a Journey character, kind of lame, kind of surprising. I was surprised to see it, that we didn't see an iconic weapon like this. And it leaves room for CG to make another Galactic Legend, because when we think about where they can go with these next metas, there's not a lot of places. And I don't even feel comfortable really speculating that Old Man Boba or Beskar Staff Mando would be Galactic Legend worthy, but I can't really think of many other directions that make a lot of sense. Now, someone we have been seeing a surprising amount of lately is the male Twi'lek Bib Fortuna. We saw him at the end of Mandalorian Season 2, naturally leads into Book of Boba Fett. We saw him in Bad Batch in that Rancor baby episode. Iconic character from Return of the Jedi. Would make a lot of sense to bring a character like him in as another passive scoundrel that could boost a lot of scoundrel squads. And it's a character I think the community would be really happy to receive. We led in this segment talking about the Executor, and with the Executor, how I didn't like using it in Grand Arena because on defense it was vulnerable to falling apart, because if you take out the Razor Crest, it's significantly easier to beat on subsequent battles. Some of those issues could be addressed with the addition of more bounty hunter ships. Dengar's Punishing One being the most obvious, especially with Dengar being a requirement to obtain the Executor. To go along with that, Jango's Slave One has been speculated upon, because with Fennec Shan's announcement, or I think it was Fennec Shan's announcement, we saw the Slave One fly by in the video. That got a lot of the community speculating on this ship as a possibility. It's not one that I need in the game or care to see too much. A Slave One is a Slave One to me. I don't need it, just like I don't need Rey's, Lando's, and Han's Falcons. But I suspect I'm in the minority here about that. Now, those ships would boost the Executor, but what I was also talking about was how I think the meta could change a little bit faster or a little bit more easily, and I wouldn't be surprised to see CG operate that way. And I think the most natural way to do that is going to be with Rebel ships. And if you watched my Grand Arena from a couple weeks ago, you saw me completely mess it up when I brought in Han's Falcon and the Rebels underneath the Malevolence. I was playing fast and sloppy, wasn't really paying attention, and I made a mistake. But I was still able to beat my opponent's Malevolence using Han's Falcon underneath the Malevolence, and that's just a testament to how good Han's Falcon synergies are with the Rebel fleet. But what it also signifies is how weak of a capital ship the Home One is, if that isn't the major component that makes the Rebel fleet successful. And it also tells me, and through conversations with those in the Discord channel, how much better the Falcon could be under a proper capital ship. Now, what my Discord channel was suggesting, what one of the people on it, was the Profundity and Admiral Radis. What we have right now within the timeline of Star Wars content is a small window where CG can be revisiting some older media that is not directly tied into an era, kind of like when they just randomly released the Ebon Hawk. They could do that for a number of other ships. Because what will happen next year is we are going to get a lot of Star Wars media next year, which means CG may need to be keeping up more with all these new releases, because we're going to be getting Obi-Wan, Cassian, Mandalorian Season 3, Bad Batch Season 2. There's a lot of things on the horizon, and there might not be a window like this again in the near future, at least in the next year. So CG could release a Admiral Radis, release the Profundity, boost up that Rebel fleet, and maybe that would set the groundwork then also for a Luke's X-Wing, which is not in the quarterly speculation, but the long-term speculation. And if we ever saw a new Rebel capital ship, we could really anticipate Luke's X-Wing coming, which we did see at the end of Mandalorian Season 2. The profundity would give us a rebel cruiser of a flagship style that we haven't seen in the game, and would create a nice, unique ship. And I think it's a guarantee that we get it at some point. And I think this next window is a small opportunity. They could fit it in other points, but I would not be surprised to see CG set the groundwork for changes to the fleet meta sooner. And there's other ways to do that, though. And that is boosting the finalizer or the Radis itself, because those ships have weaknesses. Those capital ships have weaknesses, and it's something that I've complained about, at least on the Grand Arena channels, a number of times. They are both missing a true tank. You could add Zori Bliss to the game, add her Y-Wing that she uses in the show, and with the First Order, you would just need to throw in like a First Order bomber. So there's ways you could do it. The finalizer needs a tank just like the Radis needs a tank, and just by adding those ships, I think you might boost the quality of those capital ships to the point where they could compete more easily with the Malevolence or the Negotiator or the Executor. And that could be done with a very small intervention into the game, and this window is one of those windows where you could just drop a couple ships, drop a marquee character that doesn't relate to an era or a show that is currently coming out or a movie that's on the horizon. And for the same reasons that this is a good window to revisit some of the older characters and ships that have been overlooked, this is an opportunity for Hondo to enter the game. With his scoundrel relevancy, he would tie in very nicely with Boba Fett and had some Clone War ties as well. So if we were to narrow down all of that speculation into some predictions, I think Scout Trooper is almost a guarantee. I think we're going to see some more Mandalorians, whether that be Casca Reeves or Paz Vizsla, or maybe even Pre-Vizsla, but I think somebody like Paz Vizsla is who we need the most, because we really need a much better tank in that faction. Now from there, we move into Book of Boba Fett. We don't know to what degree CG is going to be working with Lucasfilm. It might be a situation where CG doesn't make Book of Boba Fett content until after the show comes out. That's why I think Bib Fortuna is a big possibility, especially because we've seen Bib Fortuna a number of times now over the past year. It makes sense that he could be a possibility to be inserted into the game with how frequently we're seeing him, and the fan base's response to a character like him. And then I think we will see some changes to fleet, whether that is strengthening the Executor or giving another fleet a boost to counteract the Executor a little bit, even if it's not a true counter. Real quick, the free-to-play gearing of my roster. This was about a week ago, 10 days ago. I didn't do too much gearing during this period. The big portion here was Vet Chewie and Vet Han. They were the final two Galactic Legend characters I didn't have at that Gear 11 staging ground that I like to bring everybody to, where that is where it's cheap enough to gear somebody quickly without doing that expensive jump at Gear 12, and it allows you to have a character that's semi-usable and you can start playing around and explore. And now that I have all those characters at Gear 11, I have the choice where I can go in any number of directions and explore which Galactic Legend I want to go for fairly cheaply. Other than that, I have a bunch of other characters on my list, but they required a bunch of stun guns, so the only other gearing I did was Jawa Scavenger here, because Jawa Scavenger only really needed a bunch of stun cuffs, and he's the key with the thermals. And then that's it for that week. We will be back with this segment in January where we look at the next quarter and what could happen within the game. But right now, fantasy basketball, that's what this channel is really about. Potential breakout candidates. Look at Patrick Williams, the Chicago Bulls. They need him. He is a very impressive defensive player out of Florida State. This is his sophomore season. He's going to get a lot of minutes. He's going to be able to perform in a lot of ways that don't require scoring. Isaiah Stewart is another sophomore player from the Detroit Pistons who's going to have a very nice season. He is going to be the starter and is going to have a ton of minutes and opportunity to contribute. Look for Tyler Hero to have a post-hype breakout season. He was a little disappointing last year. This year, I think he finally puts it together. Some potential sleepers. Otto Porter of Golden State. He's only had one real good season so far, but he's been injured the entire time. He is in his contract year. I'm looking at him to be very motivated to play very well this season, and there are not a lot of great small forwards on that team. When it comes to the rookies, I think Mobley, of the top rookies, is being way overlooked. Everybody's looking at Suggs, Green, Cunningham for obvious reasons. Mobley should not be looked at a tier below. His opportunities are just as good as all of those guys. He is the rookie that I am targeting. On top of that, this rookie class, there are some very interesting, impressive ones. Scotty Barnes of Toronto, Şengün of the Rockets, Giddey of the Thunder. I am definitely going to be going after some of those rookies. Be safe out there, everyone. Be excellent to each other. This is Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.